There we are. Okay, fantastic. Okay, welcome everybody to the today's Rising Tide Foundation Sunday lecture. It's September 22nd. Our wonderful leaders, Cynthia and Matt, are in Calgary today, holding a symposium at the same exact time as we're speaking right now. So we're recording it for them, and I kind of jumped in as host. I hope it's going to work out. I'm a little nervous, but anyway. I want to introduce David Gosselin. David Gosselin is the editor-in-chief of the New Lyre magazine, and he writes himself on the Age of Reason, the Age of Muses, Substack.
ageofmuses.substack.com.
Thank you. Okay. And also you have something called the Chained Muse, right? That's another Substack?
Yep, sister Substack.
Okay, good. Okay. So David is going to talk about the old adage that people always say, you know, the good old age, you know, everything was better in the old times. I think we older people, we kind of do that a lot, that we have this thing about, oh, the old times were so much better than what's happening now. Well, that might be completely unfounded. Dave is going to tell us all about how people like Petrarch, or Friedrich Schiller, or Solon and Seneca all had criticism about the past, which of course they're already in the past, but they had complaints about their past, and how they complain about how the masses are so fickle and they jump from one thing to the next, which is of course kind of a thing that happens now too. So David will tell us, lead us through an exploration of the true nature of the Golden Ages through the eyes of the greatest minds. And he will reflect on what it all means for today. So with that, without further ado, David, I'm handing it over to you. And should I put the PowerPoint on now?
Yeah.
Okay. I cannot get to it.
Okay, we can technically leave it like that. I mean, I think that works, right?
Okay.
We can all see. So, all right. Thank you everyone for joining. And yeah, basically, I wish I could have had a bit more time to really go deep. So we'll consider this an introduction to these ideas, which I'll be working out a lot more. But I think there's definitely a need today to demystify certain big questions about, you know, the past, history. And I think a very bad habit that we can all have, right, at different times to romanticize the past, romanticize things, and mystify them unnecessarily, which ironically blinds us to the deeper mysteries that are real, that we do want to embrace, and which are the source of creativity and joy and insight. So yeah, you know, I was actually, a little anecdote here, I was listening to my favorite podcaster, I probably talked about him once per presentation, Tim Dillon, and he was just talking about he was comparing different nations and civilizations, and he was just talking about what made the United States different from other European nations. And in his case, he was talking about Ireland, and how he's saying if you look at a picture of Ireland from like 1900 something to today, it looks pretty much the same, right? Not much has changed. And if you compare if you compare the sort of Protestant work ethic in the United States and this idea of like embracing the future and going forward, not being afraid to innovate, to change. It's true that there was a lot of that in the United States. There was a lot of that in any period that we associate with, you know, great change, development, growth. Same thing with the Renaissance, there was an enthusiasm about sort of letting go of old superstitions and nostalgia and sort of making discoveries, right? Sort of breaking down illusions and long-held beliefs and discovering, the real thing that's kind of always there, but often lost amid all the other things. So yeah, I just thought that was a useful idea that, if we romanticize the past, we see this a lot. I follow on Twitter and all the discussions. There's a lot of, even when we talk about like ancient Greece or the Renaissance, there's a lot of cultural commentary and like, how come we don't have beautiful things anymore? And look at how beautiful this Baroque architecture is and all that. But these people that tend to do that, I mean, they don't really create or produce any culture, right? Most of the time, there's a lot of commentary that's very popular. But when you look for, well, where's the actual real new culture and new art coming from? It's not usually coming from these circles. It's not coming from people who just kind of romanticize the past or look to the past. And, funny story, I was looking on Twitter, and there's a lot, it's become very popular to sort of romanticize Templar crusading, Christian culture, right? This is becoming very popular again, where it's like Christianity got soft, it became effeminate, it was supposed to be about like peace and inclusion and loving your neighbor. But we forgot that like much of the history of Christianity is actually, involves a lot of war, right? Isn't that peaceful? And look at what's happened now that we become all sort of slothful and just passive. So we need to get back to the real thing, and you have all these images of Templar crusading and that kind of stuff. And now today, you also have, with all the migration crises, which are real, right? You have talking about, having a traditional white Christian European culture or American culture, like that's the real thing. And you see what happens when you get, you start mixing people and they lose their roots. And so there's this weird and pretty dark kind of romanticizing, right? And mythologizing of like some pure kind of culture, some pure Christianity, some pure past golden age. And, there's a lot of scapegoating, skipping steps, I would say, in terms of, well, what really was the beauty of the Christian Renaissance or, of ancient Greece? Was it really just its strong warrior culture, right? Same with the Templars. You have the same thing with the classical man, right? You have the Spartan. You can go to next slide. I have some pictures. You can just, so just have the Crusaders there on the left. And so that's, you get that a lot. And this was something that Plato, Socrates was really polemicizing against, is that you had these ideas of like virtue associated with like the warrior and bravery and courage. But that was something that really all the real Renaissance humanists and classical minds like Plato and Socrates, that tradition were very much challenged, right? And I've said this before, but I think Plato, he makes it very clear in the Laws, where he lays out a hierarchy of virtues, and he has both earthly virtues like health, beauty, wealth, things that are all good in their proper measure. And then you have the divine virtues, which are discernment, so good judgment, not being number one, temperance, justice, and courage. But he makes the point that, what good is courage or justice if you don't have, for example, the judgment to sort of allocate it, right, to determine if you're fighting on the right side. And I thought that was very relevant when I was looking at a Twitter thread where it was like a survey, it was like, if there was another crusade, would you join? And then I look at the comments, and it's just everybody's like, yeah, I'll be there in a second. And everybody was just gung-ho in the comments. And it just made me think, well, none of them asked what we'd be crusading for. So we just assume that, well, it's a crusade and it's good, right? And it's like Christian, or it's, you know, traditional Western values. It must be good, right? So I think that's the kind of thing that we, you know, if we want to get a sense of what a real golden age is about, a golden age involves reason and discernment, and not just having these appeals to authority, right? These fetishisms for authority, which is what you had with the rhetoricians, right? In ancient Greece, the sophists, and a lot of people, Pericles, Alcibiades, all these great speakers who, you know, were military men and these illustrious aristocrats that today are still held up as these great men. But Socrates was actually, and Plato, therefore, taking these kinds of people, these figures to task, because when you lift the veil, these people lack discernment, right? There was a lot of outward sort of building of monuments and sculptures and ports and, you know, all sorts of things like that. But meanwhile, the discerning faculties and the cultivation of reason was actually disappearing. There was a slothfulness that was sort of setting in morally, spiritually, and philosophically. So, I mean, we need to be able to discern which actually leads to what. So we're gonna there's a Schiller poem that is what kind of inspired this idea, right? Which I'm still working out. So we'll just explore it a bit. If you could go to the next slide. Oh, yeah, just a few more pictures for the heck of it, just before. Yeah, so this is another romanticizing of, like, you have the round table, right? The crusading the knights and their bravery and their oaths and all that, and everything is kind of imbued with some divine, you know, purpose, which is always sort of defined by some kind of priesthood class. And, you know, it's less common to question, you know, decisions at that level, right? But I think if we look at the real classical minds, whether ancient or more modern, yeah, you don't have like a mystery priesthood or some kind of elect that's kind of dictating what truth is. You have discerning minds that are having dialogues, right? Platonic dialogues, to get into those ideas. On the other hand, here, you know, these you got the maiden there and the knight, the Lady of Shalott. A lot of this romanticizing of, like, medieval enchantment, right? That mankind used to be, sort of have enchantment, or archaic man, even before modern classical Greek thought and philosophy, which sort of introduced an idea of rationality and intelligibility of the world. Before that, you know, archaic man or medieval superstition, it's very much organized purely around myth, right? People kind of live in a world of mythology, and their interpretation of reality, you know, it's not really based on an intelligible universe. It's based on a series of kind of a priori beliefs, and these things are kind of managed, especially in illiterate cultures, through the use of images, right, by a priesthood. And so, yeah, John Ruskin, he was one of these basically intellectual sort of leaders for the, you know, the revamping of the British Empire and making it a sort of global Anglo-American culture. He was the inspiration for the pre-Raphaelite school, which popularized a lot of this sort of medieval romanticizing of damsels in distress and brave knights and, virtue, all these kind of things that seem nice on the surface, but there's really a lack of, I'd say, there's a lack of discernment when you go down to, well, what do these societies actually look like? What was life like for the average person who pretty much had no access to education or literacy or any of these things? And yet it's very popular to look back to these kind of periods as something that we've lost, that, now we're just disenchanted, now we're just in our fallen state. And so let's read Schiller's poem now and see, is this just me riffing? Maybe, but what does Schiller say about this? Let's read the poem now, which is the basis for these thoughts. So this is Schiller's Words of Delusion. Schiller writes, "3 words hears man of deep import, which fly from the mouths of the great. Their meaning loses all import. It never soothes our ailing breast. Life's sweetest fruit remains but dust, so long as we in shadows trust. If one trusts in a golden age, where good triumphs over all foes, the good and true will never wage a true victorious war. Unless uprooted at its core, evil returns forevermore. If one believes that fortune's blooms are but the fruit of noble rays, evil's lush lips will make her swoon. We'll never see a peaceful day. Mankind will always vainly roam, searching for its long-fabled home. If one believes that truth can stand before the stern logic of man, even the wisest, gentlest hand will never lift its veil again. It may be mimed or caught with words, but still, its spirit escapes onwards. Free thyself from elusive words. In thy heart, let true beauty grow. What ears can't hear and eyes can't see, there lies truth in crystalline flow. Not found upon some fabled shore, she waits within forevermore." Now, we can definitely unpack that, but and since I'm looking at my screen here, if people have any thoughts or things they want to chime in already, people are more than welcome. John Rushkin, mentor to Cecil Rhodes. Yes, sir. Okay. Any first impressions from this poem before we maybe get a bit more detailed into it? I think this is a very important idea. Schiller was a leading sort of classical mind of his age and really sort of restoring a lot of clarity about, world history, the classical world, classical man, what a real classical education is, i.e. an aesthetic education, and man having an aesthetic disposition. So obviously he had to disabuse himself from, popular mythologies and ways of thinking and authorities that would sort of limit one's ability to make original discoveries. So I feel here he's laying out something important, which I think we all can have a tendency to, make this mistake of imagining some golden age, and how does that sabotage our own ability to make discoveries and think about, what's really of substance. So if no one has any thoughts, we just go a bit deeper into this one. So, these 3 words. 3 words, here's man of deep import, which fly from the mouths of the great. But, we could say, their meaning loses all import and never soothes our ailing breast. Life's sweetest fruit remains but dust, so long as we in shadows trust. First word is
Go ahead, Mark. You have to unmute yourself.
I'll just, if he wants to chime in, but otherwise I can just keep, first word is golden age, right? Second one is fortune. Third word is truth. So golden age where good triumphs over all foes. I mean, the first image we had, my cover was, it's an Arcadia Ego, which is a famous painting by the French painter Nicolas Poussin. And yeah, Arcadia is just this pastoral sort of paradise, you know, typical shepherd boys and shepherd girls. Everything is kind of pure and everybody's living in harmony with nature and da-da-da. Here in Golden Age, you know, the good knights, the good brave warriors were, you know, willing to sacrifice and, you know, die and ultimately triumph over evil. And, you know, now everybody's just cowardly, everybody's just corrupt, you know, nobody has any respect anymore, right? Nobody has any decency anymore. But yeah, there used to be this time where everything was, you know, no, people were actually good. People had decency. The good and true will never wage a true victorious war. So he says, if that's how people think, the good and true will never succeed if people have this mindset. Unless uprooted at its core, evil returns forevermore. I mean, for me, this suggests that unless we get to the actual ideas that were the basis for these different periods, or if you will, the pattern that sort of set things into motion, unless we get to that actual, those root ideas and rediscover them for ourselves, thinking about, you know, how cool, how beautiful the Renaissance was, or how awesome ancient Greece was, it's not useful at all. It can actually, it can kind of sabotage. It's, you know, it's just kind of like comparing yourself to somebody who has a different situation, right? I mean, this is like a global mental health problem, actually, especially for the youth, right? They're scrolling on TikTok, you're scrolling on social media, and you see like 22-year-olds that have like already made like their first $1 million drop shipping or whatever it is they're doing now. And a lot of people, it especially for younger people, it screws you up, because here you are just, you know, going to a regular job, going to school, having to, you know, struggle, hustle, and you see this kind of unreality. It ultimately sabotages a lot of people spiritually, morally. So if one believes that fortune's blooms are but the fruit of noble rays. So again, this is a translation and it's kind of hard to capture, but fortune, good times are but, you know, it's because you have good things or good people, right? And you know, fortune, people with good fortune just happen to have, you know, they're doing the right thing, you know, and so we can just kind of interpret reality and where the cards have fallen based on, well, there must just be some predisposed superiority to this, you know, ruling class of Anglo-Americans, or this, you know, grouping of Gnostic elect, right? They just have some knowledge that most people don't have, you know, and we just need to learn whatever rituals, learn whatever incantations. What is that New Age thing? You kind of just, you believe the thing, and until it comes true. There's a word for this. Someone is saying The Secret rings a bell. But yeah, so fake it till you make it. That's technically the modern version of that. So yeah, so people who have made it, or who have sort of have this sort of position, Manifesting, yeah, manifesting, that's a good one. We all just got to manifest. And so evil's lush lips will make her swoon, will never see a peaceful day. Mankind will always vainly roam, searching for its long fabled home. Yeah, I mean, we always imagine, therefore, okay, well, there must be something else. I must be, just in the wrong place or wrong time or something, or it's just not, I just don't have what it takes. You're looking at these other, yeah, people look at like, the Baroque Rome or Renaissance, you see all this nice architecture. You have a lot of young people that are very pessimistic because they're like, well, I don't live in that. Right. We're not in like Florence in 1500. Like, it's not my fault that that I can't reach my full potential. We're not in, ancient Greece. Nobody loves beauty anymore. Things like that. This is very popular, right? You scapegoat, you make an excuse by thinking, well, we're not in these times. We're not in a noble Christian age of courageous knights. Everybody's a coward. I've known people like this. I mean, it really, especially younger people, it really messes with the mind because they don't really understand history and they just have these myths that they're kind of keying off of to understand reality. And Schiller says, if one believes the truth can stand before the stern logic of men, even the wisest, gentlest hand will never lift its veil again. That's also an interesting one. The stern logic of men, right? Even the wisest, gentlest hand will never lift its veil again. I mean, yeah, is truth just some kind of, the product of the age of enlightenment and, accepting logic as opposed to superstition, where now you have the kind of cold Kantian sort of analytical mind that can only understand things by cutting it up, right? Cutting something up into its component parts. And then by trying to understand what each part does, you're supposed to be able to know what the whole is. This is very much the method of Aristotle as well. What's a foot supposed to do? What's the best kind of foot? Animals have 4 feet. What are the best kinds of feet for this kind of body? And just breaking everything down into parts and then doing the same thing for society. Society has slaves. What's the best behavior for a slave? Society has households. Households are made up of women and men. How should a man behave? What's the best, what's the right role of the husband? What's the right role? And we just build up our society from breaking it down into parts. I mean, this is also scholasticism. A lot of scholasticism worked this way. It's very granular, breaking everything up. What does this angel do versus what does that angel do? What is this, that? So he says, so in that case, if people are doing that, even the wisest, gentlest hand will never lift its veil again. Truth. It may be mind or caught with words. People talk about goodness, courage, virtue, but still its spirit escapes onwards. Free thyself from elusive words. In thy heart, let true beauty grow. What ears can't hear and eyes can't see, there lies truth in crystalline flow. Not found upon some fabled shore, she waits, or I should probably say she lies within forevermore. For me, this same thing that has animated the best minds in any age, which we're going to find out what they actually thought in the next slides, we can get in touch with that at any time, right? There's really nothing stopping us from having a dialogue with all those minds and going to original sources, right? Rather than reading commentaries, whether it's cultural commentary or philosophical commentary, which is why the RTF's reading sessions are so useful, and why we need a lot more of that, I think, everywhere, right? Reading Plato in the original rather than, Leo Strauss's take on Plato, or like Bronze Age mindset's take on Plato, or the Renaissance Neoplatonics, Ficino, Marsilio Ficino, and Pico della Mirandola, and their takes on Plato, which are just bad. They're just wrong. But again, people tend to rely on the commentaries of authorities, right, to help them unpack the works, the originals. But actually, I think the conclusion, or I think the takeaway that many of us here probably know by now, is we're probably going to save a lot of time by just struggling with the original work first directly, rather than getting lost in a labyrinth of commentaries with people with agendas, which they don't usually tell you they have. But we'll see some of them. So we can go to the next slide. Yeah, you just want to read something from Petrarch. So this is Petrarch. Great. We're going to learn about one of the great classical, archetype.
Can I interrupt you for a second, David?
Yeah, sure.
What's the German title of that Schiller poem? Drei Worte?
No, it's something Worte des Vana or something. I believe, I forget, it's like a W word. It's not
Worte des Wahn?
something like that, yeah.
Okay, I'll look it up. Thank you.
Yeah, and there's many different translations, and they're all kind of not, like, they're not perfect. You can tell it's not, like, you can tell it's a translation, but that's mine, and having read it, it's knowing Schiller and how he's thinking, like, I mean, the point is there. But so here's Petrarch. We all look to the Renaissance and imagine, again, great period of just learning and cultural flourishing, and everything is so great. Not like our age where everything is apparently shitty, and So, seventh sonnet, what does Petrarch say? Gluttony, sleep, pillows of idleness have banished every virtue from the world, whereby our nature conquered by its habits has almost lost its way along the road. So spent is every good light from the heavens, which should inform our human life, that he is pointed out as some remarkable thing who would make water flow from Helicon. Who wishes for the laurel or for myrtle? In poverty and naked ghost philosophy, the masses, bent on making money, say, you will have few companions on that road. So all the more, I beg you, noble spirit, do not abandon your magnanimous task. Now, there are many more like this, but this isn't exactly somebody who's enthusiastic about the age in which he's in. And there's a lot of good reasons for that, right? We think Petrarch, Renaissance, we think Dante, but they were constantly plagued, sort of the cities and the regions which they were in were constantly plagued by wars, right? Civil strife. Dante, just like Petrarch's father, they were both banned from Florence because of the war between the Guelphs and the Ghibellines, right? The pro-papal versus pro-empire factions. So they're very chaotic periods. And as Dante depicts in his comedy, right? I mean, it was one hell of a corrupt age. We're saying how corrupt our age is, but arguably things were a lot harder back then than they are today to affect any kind of meaningful change, right? We have a much greater ability to communicate and spread ideas today than any of these guys had in their times. And, you know, so how they were successful and their approaches matter. But it's also, if we want to, you know how to be effective today and spread ideas and, you know, develop ourselves, we can't just key off, you know, these past periods. We have to discover that same thing in ourselves and see how it applies to our context. And I think I'm an optimist, right? I feel like people tend to think we're in some dark age, but I'd argue that in many ways we're kind of in a golden age right now. Golden age of the internet, golden age of discourse. Discussions that are being had today would not even been thinkable just a few years ago, right? You don't have 5 media companies gatekeeping truth and access to information. It's we live in a totally different world, and obviously there are other obstacles, right? People are very atomized. You know, social habits have changed, but I'd very much say that we're in something of a golden age right now. And in the same way that if you read a Petrarch and he doesn't exactly sound thrilled, and you can read his letters, you know, he complains about just, you know, people just like pleasure. They just want novelty, right? They just want to go to carnivals. You know, they were ostensibly Christian, you know, the 40 nights and like the Paschal carnivals and all that, but it was a lot of the same stuff, right? There's a lot of pageantry. People love pageantry. The best artists were sort of serving, you know, degenerate nobles and to just entertain. You know, nothing new under the sun in that sense. But what we choose to create under that sun, I mean, again, I think that's what that's kind of on us. You know, do we want to tap into the real thing, or do we just want to be romantics, you know, imagining some better age that, you know, we just don't have the fortune to partake in, so we can kind of just settle for, you know, shittiness, being shitty. I'll read one more from Petrarch just to drive home. I think he has some nice sentiments here. Or they're a bit more sobering than a lot of the romantic language, again, that Petrarch became popular for, which he wasn't happy about. He wasn't happy that like what people loved were just like his nice romantic sonnets and all that. And he has much less of these more sobering kinds that we're reading now, but these are more indicative of, you know, the kind of person he was or became. So this is the first sonnet. This is what opens the whole canzoniere up. He says, "Oh, you who hear in soft and scattered lays the strains and sighs on which I fed my heart in my less learned and unwise earlier days, when my youth bade me play a different part, weeping and reasoning in varied styles, and vacillating over hope and pain, to those with knowledge gained through love's stern trials, I pray that their pardon may be obtained. For now I clearly see that at the root I'm treated like a tale, such that too often what I was has become a shameful scene. I learned that vanity bears but vain fruit, repentance, and the sober recognition that most of what we love is but a dream." There's a tearing down of illusions here that I like, that I think is spiritually rousing, right? When you see somebody tear themselves away from their own illusions of the world, their sort of beliefs, blind faiths and authorities, and you know, sacred cows, artistically, philosophically, politically and otherwise. You know, when we see somebody breaking with that, you know, that gives us strength. And Schiller talks about this as well. This is the sublime, which I think was being read during one of the weekly sessions, right? Schiller has the great quote about Ulysses being in the arms of Calypso, the voluptuous goddess, and you know he's in an illusion which he's sort of enthralled to for the longest time, but then finally he hears the voice of Mentor, which is Athena, which is the voice of wisdom, and he throws himself into the waves, and he is free. Schiller writes. So that's powerful, right? That's not a romantic notion. And I think that starts to get us closer to this Renaissance ideal. So we can go to the next slide. Okay, so this is just to set it out. So just a little description of Petrarch. We're zooming out now. Does somebody want to read this? Change of. And there's comments.
Jerry, why don't you read it?
Yes, ma'am. The beginnings of the Renaissance spirit, which are so discernible in Dante, become in Petrarch the full expression of the new age. In the words of Professor Adams, quote, "In him we clearly find, as controlling personal traits, all those specific features of the Renaissance which give it its distinguishing character as an intellectual revolution. And from their strong beginning in him, they have never ceased among men. In the first place, he felt, as no other man had done since the ancient days, the beauty of nature and the pleasure of mere life, its sufficiency for itself. And he had also a sense of ability and power, and a self-confidence which led him to plan great things, and to hope for an immortality of fame in this world. In the second place, he had a most keen sense of the unity of past history, of the living bond of connection between himself and men of like sort in the ancient world. That world was for him no dead antiquity, but he lived and felt in it and with its poets and thinkers as if they were his neighbors. His love for it amounted almost, if we may call it so, to an ecstatic enthusiasm, hardly understood by his own time, but it kindled in many others a similar feeling, which has come down to us. The result is easily recognized in him as a genuine culture, the first of modern men in whom this can be found. Finally, Petrarch first put the modern spirit into conscious opposition to the medieval. The Renaissance meant rebellion and revolution. It meant a long and bitter struggle against the whole scholastic system and all the follies and superstitions which flourished under its protection. Petrarch opened the attack along the whole line. Physicians, lawyers, astrologers, scholastic philosophers, the universities, all were enemies of the new learning, and so his enemies. And these attacks were not in set and formal polemics alone. His letters and almost all his writings were filled with them. It was the business of his life. End of quote.
Yeah, so I mean, Petrarch really was going to war with the sort of authorities of his age, and he was lucky that he developed you know, quite a big, he had a lot of influence due to, you know, the popularity of his romantic poetry, you know, so there's different, you know, different things going on there. He was famous for a certain kind of poetry. And yeah, he garnered a lot of respect because of his, you know, mastery of language. But he was very much about sort of breaking rank with many of the with the established sort of authorities and the fetishes for authority. So this is, the next slide is a quote, which I've used before, but I think it warrants repeating. So this is Petrarch from De Sui Ipsius et Multurum Ignorantia, on his ignorance and that of others. Sometimes I asked with a smile how Aristotle could have known that, for it was not proven by the light of reason, nor could it be tested by experiment, two hallmarks of, you know, learning or discovering anything. At that they would fall silent, in surprise and anger, as if they regarded me as a blasphemer who asked any proof beyond the authority of Aristotle. So we bid fair to be no longer philosophers, lovers of truth, but Aristotelians, reviving the absurd custom which permits us to ask no question except whether he said it. I believe, indeed, that Aristotle is a great man and that he knew much, yet he was but a man, and therefore something, nay, many things, may have escaped him. I will say more. I am confident, beyond a doubt, that he was in error all his life, not only as regards smaller matters, where a mistake counts for little, but in the most weighty questions, where his supreme interests were involved. And although he has said much of happiness, both at the beginning and the end of his ethics, I dare assert, let my critics exclaim as they may, that he was so completely ignorant of true happiness that the opinions upon this matter of any pious old woman or devout fisherman, shepherd, or farmer would, if not so fine spun, be more to the point than his. So one of the big guys, you know, to take down was really Aristotle, which sort of dominated the medieval church and therefore dominated theology and therefore dominated, you know, discussions of the divine and how one comes to know God, interpretations of scripture. Everything was kind of dominated by this Aristotelian syllogistic style reasoning, just using logical arguments. You know, if A, then B, then, you know, A can't be B, B can't be A. This kind of reasoning as if you're going to understand God, or, you know, the nature of man made in the image of God with that kind of logical ratiocination. Comparative knowledge is what Cusa called it. So Cusa just gave the example of the famous paradox, right, of the maximum and the minimum, using his geometric proofs, basically to make the point that the microcosm and the macrocosm, right, the mind of man and the mind of God, there's a coincidence of, you know, the smallest and the largest, the maximum and the minimum, which contradicts Aristotle's whole system that something can't be A and not A. You know, something can't be both the microcosm and macrocosm, the minimum and maximum. These are transcendental arguments. So Aristotle didn't really have that. So how could man, if he's man, also be made in the image of God, right? Or how could a man be both man and God? For the Aristotelian, there's no logical way to resolve these kind of ideas. But so how do we understand, you know, the divine nature of man, his ability to, you know, act as a co-creator, to be as man, as imago viva Dei, a living image of God? And so Nicholas of Cusa, who was another, you know, Renaissance giant, he also goes after Aristotle, writing, but the Aristotelian sect now prevails. This sect regards as heresy the method of the coincidence of opposites. Yet the endorsement of this method is the beginning of the ascent unto mystical theology. Hence, this method, which is completely tasteless to those nourished in this sect, is pushed far from them, is being contrary to their undertaking. Hence, it would be comparable to a miracle, just as would be the transformation of the sect for them to reject Aristotle and to leap higher. So, these are two of the, great Renaissance minds, and they're pretty much attacking this cult that controls a lot of the intellectual life of Europe, right, and in the church. So in the same way, I think of Socrates, Plato challenging the rhetoricians, which were the sort of the authorities, and the sophists. They were the authorities of their age. And so all these great minds are always kind of having to go to war with what is with the sacred cows of that period, because the sacred cows are the sacred cows, right? They're what people kind of worship blindly. And so as long as you have those, if you're a social engineer or priesthood, you can always sort of control or limit what ideas people have access to just by the nature of the cows they worship, if you will. So yeah, I think any real Renaissance mind is going to have to go to war with these things, and therefore read the original works so that they're confident in what they're saying, and they're not relying on the interpretations of magicians and priests and sophists, just like today. What's our next slide? So now we'll go into, we'll just go into so this is a bit of new research. I've been reading two works, Eros and the Renaissance, or Eros and Magic in the Renaissance, and this is Francis A. Yates, Giordano Bruno, and the Hermetic Tradition. And there's just a lot, these books are talking a lot about the sort of occult and, magic infested institutions of the Renaissance period of Florence, which a lot of it was infiltrated, right? And so some people will rightly criticize the Renaissance for certain things, but then they'll throw the baby out with the bathwater. And then it's the opposite. There's people who will sort of see something good, but then if we lack the discernment to know what's the actual good stuff from the subversive stuff, the mind is kind of poisoned. So in this kind of research, I've been paying a lot of attention to the Renaissance because it's a sacred cow, right? Like we just assume it was all great and but that actually, I think, is a major obstacle to us, getting back to the real thing, the essence of it, as we're seeing with these people like Petrarch, like Cusa, that really had to push back against stuff that today a lot of people who are excited about classical culture, they can't make these distinctions. They don't really know how to think about Aristotle versus Plato, despite this being like at the heart of, the historical battle of ideas. So the Renaissance is a good example because, Aristotle came under attack. And so you had to rehabilitate certain ideas under different, disguises. And so one of the big ones was the supposed revival of Plato in the Renaissance, around like the Platonic Academy, Ficino's academy at Athens and Florence, and people like Marsilio Ficino, who was a Catholic priest but was really doing Orphic hymn, magic rituals and really deep into astrology, and that's really what was sort of being discussed in the background. Hermetic kind of magic stuff, Pico de la Mirandola as well. These people are often touted as like great Renaissance minds. But they were really perverting Plato, and this is what Neoplatonism is. Neoplatonism is, which has a lot of weird hermetic magic kind of stuff. And so I just took this, just this for a visual here. You know, we all associate this with the Renaissance, or this, you look it up, Primavera, Botticelli, and like, this is like the quintessential Renaissance painting. I don't know about you guys, but I was like, I don't know that I understand. I don't know what's going on here. And I didn't. And so probably too late, I started to look into it before doing this class, as like, it was bothering me. It wasn't even preparation. I started to be like, what are these Renaissance paintings that we're told are like, you know, the acme of Renaissance art? And then finally, I don't even know what they're about. So I looked into this one, and this will go with the ideas of Ficino. So what is Neoplatonism? Looks like pregnant woman and fertility. Yeah, for one, but yeah, how do we think about fertility and all these things? If we can go to the next slide, we're going to come back to this image, but I don't know, maybe some people know what's going on here. I didn't, and you know, I'm still not fully sure, but we're gonna hear a bit about that. So one of the leading Neoplatonic thinkers in the Renaissance, which is always heralded as like, it was Plato, and they were Platonists, and everybody was excited about Plato, despite most people not even still knowing Greek. Plato, Petrarch only had the Phaedo and the Timaeus. Like, despite what people say, Petrarch didn't really have, he couldn't really read Greek. And the translations that were available were very bad, by and large, the Latin ones. So there was a great excitement about classics, but compared to today, like what we have access to today is would like, it would just blow, you know, the heads off all the Renaissance people. They wouldn't be able to believe it. You know, we can learn ancient Greek on our own, like quite easily now, just by, you know, going on YouTube, to be quite frank. So all this is just like next level, inconceivable back in those days. But so who were the people spreading so-called Platonic ideas? I just pull up Wikipedia because it's like the official, or, you know, the collective's sort of, you know, stand on what's what. So it says, Ficino was an Italian scholar and Catholic priest who was one of the most influential humanist philosophers of the early Italian Renaissance. He was an astrologer, a reviver of Neoplatonism, in touch with the major academics of his day, and the first translator of Plato's complete extant works into Latin. His Florentine Academy, an attempt to revive Plato's Academy, influenced the direction and tenor of the Italian Renaissance and the development of European philosophy. So apparently, his Florentine Academy. So apparently this guy's the guy spreading Plato's ideas, right? So now I found an interesting little article. If we want, what is this? Neoplatonism is this very subversive school that goes back to the, you know, the very beginnings of these sort of Gnostic and satanic infiltrations of Christianity. The more mystical brands of it, especially where you kind of mystify everything using whatever talismans, incantations, all sorts of archetypes. So we can go to the next slide. It's gonna get a bit weird here. So this was from an article. I was looking into the three graces, which it talks about in this book on the Hermetic tradition, which is relevant for the painting we're just looking at, supposedly quintessential Renaissance art. So just read this a bit, and you'll see it. According to the Platonic tradition, all multitude participates in a certain respect of the one, end quote. Okay, sure. In every being, there's a mixture of bound and infinite. What causes that mixture is the desirability of the one. That's why desire, or eros, is foundational to Platonic metaphysics. Desire is a condition of existence. Two opposites desire to come back to one thing. We see this at the material level with the desirability of the man-woman partnership, and we see it in the evolution of matter towards spirit, or the desire for matter to be spiritualized. Okay? So we're going to keep reading for a bit. There's another slide. The three graces and the soul's journey. So the three graces, this is one of these mnemonics, if you will, sort of, there's something called the art of memory, especially for these traditions of magic. So you have certain images, certain things that you hold in your mind that have like a, you know, transmuting, transformational effect, right? Which you still have this stuff today, right? The idea that if you visualizations, a lot of hypnosis is visualizations, getting people to close their eyes and think of certain things. And depending on the images or the heuristics, the shortcuts, the things that you're getting them to think of, think about this way. Imagine you're just on a cliff and you're looking down, you know, you want to get people to, you know, cross over a certain threshold or face their fear or something. So you have the three graces. This is one in Neoplatonism. So let's learn a bit about the three graces, since it features in this supposedly, you know, great Renaissance masterpiece. The three graces and the soul's journey. The sun moves down and then back up. It ascends and descends. The soul is analogous to the sun, as it too is at the center of our world, and it also has periods of flourishing and diminishing. Next slide. Okay, so now we have the three graces. I just screenshotted the Substack. So we have the three graces: emanatio, conversion, and rimeatio. Overflowing, rapture, conversion, return, or procession, rapture, and return. The good bestows its bounty on lower beings through a kind of overflowing or emanation, which produces a vivifying rapture or conversion, whereby lower beings are drawn back into heaven and rejoin the gods. We're just going to read a bit more and then I'll say something. But okay, so there's this triad, right? This becomes, you can think of the Trinity, right? And so in these Neoplatonic schools, you're always having subversions of certain things, right? So they sound similar. Yeah, the Trinity, there's triads everywhere. The Trinity's like sacred, right? You have all these different triads. Eros, right? Eros is an invitation to desire. Of Eros is the is the love of, there's the love of beauty, right? We're drawn to beauty. That's natural. And then you get these weird things though. So, okay, it's through the erotic, and you start to get, you see the images that start to be presented that are supposed to supposedly invite us to a path of, you know, discovering goodness, truth, and beauty through Eros, apparently, right? So what does this look like in Renaissance art or today? So now it says, the good bestows its bounty on lower beings through a kind of overflowing or emanation, which produces a vivifying rapture or conversion, whereby lower beings are drawn back into heaven and rejoin the gods. This process can be summarized as procession, conversion, rapture, return. Okay, next slide. One more. Florentine Platonists Marsilio Ficino and Pico della Mirandola often use the three graces as an exemplary triad, an archetype on which other triads of Neoplatonism appear to be modeled, because every triad is governed by procession, rapture, and return. It is an axiom of Platonic theology that every god exerts his power in a triadic rhythm. So Plato, right, because Plato talks about, you know, there being the one, and, you know, if we have a relationship to the one, first we're in the shadows, then we have to ascend, but then we also have to come back once we have that knowledge. So they're playing with that. So Pico della Mirandola says, he that understands profoundly and clearly how the unity of Venus is unfolded in the trinity of the graces, and the unit of necessity in the trinity of the fates, and the unity of Saturn in the trinity of Jupiter, Neptune, and Pluto, knows the proper way of proceeding in Orphic theology. Okay. So what's the next slide? Can you just okay, so yeah, you can go back. So now I'm just going to read so what does this all mean, right? So basically, can we go back to the painting now, because we're going to read something on the painting. So the three graces are originally in classical. You have Thalia, which is bloom. You have one which is flora, and you have another which is like fecundity or something. But so the Neoplatonists, the idea of magic, as I'm reading in these books on Neoplatonism and the Renaissance, what was the Hermetic magic and popularity of these things in the Renaissance? They talk about in terms of images and comparisons, that you could, especially of erotic images, that you could use erotic images to guide people and to get them to come to certain ideas, because eros is the sort of the desire, right, for beauty. So you could use enticing images, especially erotic ones, to lead people to certain things. And this is magic. That's what the idea, it was understood as magic, that through that you can get people to change. You can get people to change their ideas, to change their thoughts. Sound familiar? Right? If you think of Freud and all that, nothing new under the sun, right? So we're gonna look at this painting here. So Frances A. Yates is like a high priest of the occult. She's written on the art of memory, the Hermetic tradition, the Renaissance. She wrote the foreword to this other book that I also shared with Matt, Eros and Magic in the Renaissance, which talks about this kind of magia naturalis, as Ficino, natural magic, right? Just playing with images, so-called. So what do they say here? So who is this Ficino guy, who's apparently a leading Platonist and talking about graces and triads and how we're going to catch the emanations overflowing of the divine? We take them and then we ascend, and then we come back and we're just transformed, right? So Yates writes, in spite of all his precautions, Ficino did not avoid getting into trouble for the libri de vita, as we learned from his Apologia for that work. People had evidently been asking questions such as, is not Marsilius a priest? What is a priest to do with medicine and astrology? What is a Christian to do with magic and images? Ficino counters by pointing out that in ancient times, priests always did medicine, mentioning Chaldean, Persian, and Egyptian priests. That medicine is impossible without astrology, that Christ himself was a healer. But above all, he emphasizes that there are two kinds of magic. One demonic magic, which is illicit and wicked. The other natural magic, which is useful and necessary. The only kind of magic which he has practiced or advised is the good and useful kind. Magia naturalis. Okay. So, I mean, he's a practicing magician, I guess we could say. So, we're going to talk just about this painting here. Now Yates is going to talk about the painting. One thing. Does anybody have thoughts on this painting before I say anything? Like, now am I the only one who has no idea what this was really about, or like any Renaissance aficionados here? Please stand up if there are.
Yep. I wrote what I talked about the painting in the chat. Looks like they're all pregnant, not just one. Seems they all pregnant. And the thing about the man who picks the apple instead of the woman is another particular thing about the painting. And the three women on the left are all saying they all hold hands, and the three women on the left, none of them hold hands. I feel like there's a good way on the left, bad way on the right, like the boat we seen on last course.
Okay.
That's about all I say about this picture.
Someone else says the second Adam and Eve.
Yeah.
Okay.
The opposite of what happened to Adam and Eve is what hits me when I look at this.
Okay. Fair enough. So, yeah, what is a high priestess expert in Hermetic Renaissance magic have to say? We're just going to start. Okay, we'll just say this. Far be it from me to attempt yet another detailed interpretation of the figures in the Primavera. I want only to suggest that in the context of the study of Ficino's magic, the picture begins to be seen as a practical application of that magic, as a complex talisman, a quote, image of the world, arranged so as to transmit only healthful, rejuvenating, anti-Saturnian influences to the beholder. Here in visual form is Ficino's natural magic, using grouping of trees and flowers, using only planetary images, and those only in relation to the world, not to attract demons, or as shadows of ideas in the Neoplatonic hierarchy. And whatever the figures on the right may represent mythologically, is it not the spiritus mundi which blows through them, blown from the puffed cheeks of the aerial spirit, made visible in the wind-blown folds of the draperies of the running figure? The spiritus, which is the channel for the influences of the stars, has been caught and stored in the magic talisman. Now, it goes on, but so to the left to start, we have Mercury. So to our far left here, he's picking an apple. So he's the god of, actually, it said of the god of, among other things, fecundity, and he's a messenger, right? He brings message. He's an intermediate. So that the Hermetic tradition, Hermetic order, you're having something transmitted to you. And so then you have the three graces. Those are the next that come to him. And so here they write, we have, in short, to think of Renaissance magic as both in continuity with medieval magic and also the transformation of that tradition to something new. The phenomena is exactly parallel with that other phenomena which Warburg and Saxel discovered, namely how the images of the gods were preserved through the Middle Ages in astrological manuscripts, reached the Renaissance in that barbarized form, and were then reinvested with classical form through the rediscovery and imitation of classical works of art. In the same way, astral magic comes down in the medieval tradition and is reinvested with classical form in the Renaissance through the rediscovery of Neoplatonic theurgy. Ficino's magic, with its hymns to the sun, its three graces in an astrological context, as we were just reading about before, its Neoplatonism, is closer in outlook, practice, and classical form to the Emperor Julian than it is to the Picatrix, which is an older Hermetic document. And then they keep talking about, and yet just as a pagan Renaissance work of art is not purely pagan, but retains Christian overtones or undertones, the classical example of this being Botticelli's Venus, who looks like a virgin, so it is also with Ficino's magic. This cannot be regarded as a purely medical practice which he kept quite separate from his religion, because as D.P. Walker has emphasized, it was in itself a kind of religion. Walker has quoted a passage from Ficino's close disciple and imitator, Francesco da Giacchetto, in which this comes out most clearly. Giacchetto describes how one who wishes to acquire, quote, Solarian gifts should robe himself in a mantle of Solarian color, such as gold, and conduct a rite involving burning of incense made from solar plants before an altar on which is an image of the sun. For example, quote, an image of the sun enthroned, crowned and wearing a saffron cloak. Likewise, a raven and the figure of the sun, end quote. This is the solar talisman in De Vita Coelitus, which we thought, which is Ficino's work, which we thought might be derived from Picatrix, another Hermetic document. Then anointed with unguents made from solar materials, his to sing an Orphic hymn to the sun, invoking him as the divine Henad, which is a thing that binds other principles, as the mind and as the soul. This is the Neoplatonic triad under which the Emperor Julian worshipped the sun. So I'll just leave it at that, but this goes on for quite a while, that basically these mystery cults that had been used to infiltrate Christianity since, like, you know, during the Roman Empire, since almost, you know, the beginning of Christianity. This stuff was very big in the Renaissance. And so is this painting, among many others, the idea here of eros is one that stands out. We'll find it in a lot of Renaissance art, where eros is seen as this thing that kind of entices you to virtue, right? To attract you and to get you to ascend. Now, obviously, there's good and bad ways to look at that. But if we're dealing with this kind of Neoplatonic, Hermetic, you know, sun-worshipping Emperor Julian the Apostate sects, right? These mystery cults that go to the highest levels of the Roman oligarchy, you know, and its descendants, right? Especially Venice, which is all heavily involved in the Florentine, the academies and all the artistic things going on. There's a lot more there, and there's a constant attempt to pervert Plato, and in this case, a lot of it, you know, they're perverting the Symposium, which, if anybody reads the actual Symposium, it's clear that Socrates is not suggesting this kind of idea. But this is very popular to this day. This is very popular with Jung as well. I mean, this was Freud as well. We can just go a bit further now. There's we're gonna go one step further just to see these ideas, the culmination. If we can just go to the next slide. What do we have here? It's fine. Okay. Oh, we can keep going. Yeah. Okay. So here. So Bernini is another famous supposed Renaissance genius. He was the leading Baroque sculptor, and we're often told, right? We're often, again, this is very popular today, to have these extravagant pictures of Baroque Rome, and be like, why can't we have beautiful things anymore? There's a lot of nice craftsmanship, you know, but was it really a golden age? You know, what would things actually look like on the ground? You know, was this a continuation of Renaissance ideals? If we just go to the previous slide, I'm going to read something from, this is for an article I'm doing on Bernini. So this is just a glimpse of one of these ideas, exposing some of these sacred cows to kind of free people up a bit, their imaginations. So this is from Bernini, his life in Rome, by an interesting scholar, something Mermando. So it's just sets what was the Rome, what was Baroque Rome? It was really it was during the Counter-Reformation, right? So there's the Reformation, Protestant Church, all sorts of war broken out, and now the Catholic Church is flexing to sort of try and win back people and assert its dominance as like the one true church. So how was it? What was going? So art was very much a weapon, just like today, right? Or just like in any age. But so can we? Just because they use classical techniques, right? Just because a lot of sculptures or paintings use classical techniques, does that mean they're really classical? What kind of ideas are they really communicating, and can we discern? Right? I think that's like, if we really want to get to the real thing, we have to be able to do that. And it helps to know about these currents and what was actually happening on the ground. So here, this is Marmando. After 1517 and the outbreak of the Protestant Reformation, and even more so after 1563, the close of the Council of Trent and the beginning of the Counter-Reformation, the self-publicity of papal art and architecture projects was directed toward not only the Catholic faithful, but the Protestant, quote, heretics as well. As is obvious from even a superficial acquaintance with the ecclesiastical literature of Counter-Reformation Rome, the Catholic Church felt itself in constant competition with the Protestant churches, having to continually prove its legitimacy and assert its superiority against their strenuous and, for growing numbers of adherents, persuasive claims to the contrary. One of the Church's self-legitimizing proofs was the wonder-working sanctity of its canonized members, for example, levitating mystics like Teresa of Avila. It goes on, displays of spiritual marvels like Bernini's Saint Teresa in Ecstasy thus bore the further implicit message: it is only within the fold of the one true Church, the Roman Catholic Church, that such mystical marvels, such heights of spiritual achievement can ever be reached. Quote, why is everybody writhing? A non-Catholic visitor to Rome once asked me, referring to the Baroque art of its churches, with its many ebullient depictions of saints twisting and turning in ecstasy or near ecstasy. Everyone is writhing, ultimately, to advertise the joy of being a Roman Catholic, a privileged member of the, quote, one true Church, in the sunny land of the popes during the triumphal years of the Counter-Reformation. The dance of the saints was an invitation to the party of the blessed. And so Bernini was one of the leading virtuosos that was employed, to make the art that would wow everybody, right? These spectacles. And if you go back one slide, Bernini is a sacred cow, and or forward to wherever there's another Bernini. Yeah. So this is also from the same book. Bernini's landmark 40 Hours displays of 1628 featured, according to an eyewitness description, a representation of the, quote, glory of paradise shining with tremendous brightness without one seeing any light except that which emanated from more than 2,000 lamps hidden behind the clouds of the glory, end quote. In other words, a jaw-dropping spectacle worthy of the Broadway stage. Indeed, the roots of Broadway are in Baroque Rome. So Bernini is basically the rock star. Like, these are like Bernini's kind of, it's like you get the rock show vibe. And I think a lot of people, they see these nice sculptures and they're like, wow, again, this is very popular today, Twitter and culture wars. Why can't we have beautiful craftsmanship? Why can't we have beautiful things? But that, you can have good craftsmanship, but what kind of ideas are you actually advancing? Or, are we making the world and mysteries of man more intelligible, or are we mystifying them? And so the key work, or the most famous work perhaps for Bernini, is the central image, the Ecstasy of Saint Teresa. So, I mean, an angel, we could zoom in here. We could probably, I don't know if people have seen this one before, but you have an angel. Teresa is kind of, she's in, quote, ecstasy, I guess, and the angel is getting ready to throw that arrow into her heart. She's like betrothed with God now, unity. She's having that ecstatic vision of like the eighth heaven or whatnot. And if you the closer we go into this image, and if you look at the faces and all that, and we look at Bernini's other works, there's very much an equation, the same Neoplatonic hermetic idea of eros inviting people to virtue and to develop themselves, and to access their deeper hidden powers. This is very popular with Jung as well. This is very popular with Freud, right? This is Freud before Freud, basically. So you have the eros principle, right? That is the thing that's sort of guiding society, the pleasure principle, and people will do things in order to get that pleasure. And society is structured in such a way that, people have to repress certain things in order to accomplish certain things so that they can, in this material world, attain the things they desire. And so society is really just this interplay of repression and eros and thanatos and death and all warring. And so the magic of eliciting, right, these desires to supposedly guide people to virtue, to truth, to goodness, is something that we actually find in quite a bit, or maybe there's hidden messages in this art. With Bernini, it's quite clear, though. I mean, all the defenders, again, go on Twitter, go on places, they'll always tell you that it's very common that the ecstasy of Saint Teresa is very much it's a metaphor for like the era for an ecstatic vision, a transcendent spiritual experience, the closest thing for man, or the metaphor that man can use to understand a sort of spiritual experience of God. The rapture of it is like an erotic experience. That's the comparison that you're going to keep running into. And so Bernini was just trying to find a metaphor to invite people to experience spiritual bliss. And this perversion, I mean, it goes pretty deep, because then you'll have people say that, for example, Dante and the Commedia, what became an intellectual vision, the Apollonian sort of like flight to paradise and like making discoveries and asking question and answers, the Socratic dialogues that he has with Beatrice, those are just the Apollonian or spiritualized version of the primal erotic vision that Dante had of Beatrice, that he was younger. So it just matures from this primal erotic thing to this spiritualized eros in terms of intellectual love of beauty, appreciation of beautiful art. So that's there. That's very popular until this day, where again, with a lot of the young stuff, with a lot of like the modern psychology stuff, there's the Satanism stuff, right? That it's by getting back to those primal sort of desires, uninhibited by all the artificial constructs, that's actually how you're going to experience the divine, and so that's a lot of Huxley, later years, that's a lot of the 1960s, the rock, drug, sex stuff, just liberation, getting back to that primal sort of pure so-called experience. Obviously, we know that it doesn't exactly work like that, right? This gets very dangerous if you just start selling this and promoting this. So in the church art, it's a bit more veiled in the Renaissance art. But yeah, if we can't make these distinctions between this and what Plato was actually talking about in terms of how one, pursues virtue, we're in trouble. And I mean, what better way to sort of illustrate these ideas than to take some of the sacred cows, like Petrarch was doing, like Socrates was doing in challenging like Plato was doing in challenging the authority of the poets, right, to sort of shape the cosmological matrix of ancient Greeks, without necessarily having truth as a standard. Yeah, I mean, I'd say this is the quickest path. If we're doing shorthand here, probably one of the quickest paths is to kind of just take a closer look at some of the sacred cows and some of the things that we're told are, you know, these ironclad narratives. And yeah, just take a closer look and, you know, is there anything else there? We can just about close, maybe just look at one more. Actually, there's a lot more, but I feel like rambled on for a long time. So yeah, I was here are different sculptures, here are different works of art, which I'd say are more actual Renaissance works of art. So you have you have these Christian stories now cast in classical form. So that's true. And we talked about that. And there was a lot of that in the Renaissance. Things were freed from just these kind of static icons, right? These abstractions, and the divine and different ideas were sort of given a more human form, right? Something that we could, they were embodied, right? And using classical forms to sort of convey that. So David and Goliath, killer of giants. Judith and Holofernes. So these are by Donatello. Judith and Holofernes, another from the book of Judith. He's an Assyrian general, captures the town. He's going to ransack, pillage, and rape his armies, that is, the whole town. And Judith gets him drunk, and she cuts off his head because he desired her. And so she used that to cut off his head. And so that's actually kind of a very intense, but very clear embodiment of sort of virtue triumphing over vice. Same thing, David, sort of intellect triumphing over just brute force, brute Philistine sort of, power, strength. And then you have the Duomo, right, which Brunelleschi sort of broke. He transformed, everything to make this possible, a fusion of art, science, architecture, all brought together in a way that, you hadn't seen really, or shouldn't say that. He advanced it in a way that, hadn't been done before. So classical beauty very much has this idea of science and art being sort of perfectly wed, right? One is just complements the other. If we contrast that with a lot of contemporary art, where it's the kind of irrational feelings, just the impulses sort of given some symbolic form that we don't fully understand because man is by and large irrational anyways, right? And art is just a struggle to kind of express that. So you don't have that problem in Renaissance art. You don't have that confusion, and that allows you to do things like the Duomo, that allows you to sort of redefine the boundaries of art and science. And that's the church where you had the councils of Florence that unified the Eastern and Western churches for a period where the idea was basically not to argue over different traditional, regional disagreements, right, and traditions, differences in traditions and rights, but to agree on the fundamental and higher transcendent truths that man is in the living image of God, right? And it's that divine spark that everyone has, that's what's central, right, to a truly Christian notion of man. I mean, everybody's a child of God, right? So blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. That's Christ from the Sermon on the Mount. So you had that spirit, right? And I mean, another thing is peace. Nicholas of Cusa, Petrarch, they were all ambassadors, right? Dante, they were trying to stop war, which is very different from this mythos today of like Templar and like crusading, Greek warriors and all that, who don't have the discernment to prevent wars and to protect their best minds and their overall population, but they kill each other. And rather than foreign invaders being the threats, whether to ancient Greece, right, or whether it wasn't really Persia, the ultimate threat was what destroyed it was within, was civil strife with the 30 tyrants, Florence, the warring city-states, the Protestant, Catholic, 200 years wars of killing each other. Last I checked, they were all white, right? And yet that was like the most disastrous war. It wasn't Ethiopian migrants that sort of undid the Renaissance or, European achievements. So these Renaissance minds were very much concerned about peace, and there was very much, you had this genuine Christian image of man made in the image of God, which if we take seriously informs us in, how we deal with conflicts and differing views, right? Versus this kind of evil stuff that you have today that's saying, no, we actually, we need wars. We need to sort of Nietzschean power struggles, and saying, that's the history, that's the broader history of Christianity, is wars and crusading, and that it's not peaceful. So we could go on, but what other slides? I had a whole other section now on ancient Greece, Solon, but we can just, it's just from Schiller's legislation of Lycurgus and Solon. But basically everything we talked about for the Renaissance, same kind of thing for ancient Greece. And so if we want to disabuse ourselves from all these sacred cows, I mean, we're probably best, like Petrarch did, having an enthusiasm for being in dialogue with the greatest minds, but not being afraid to, take a closer look at a lot of what we are given as these ironclad narratives about art, about beauty, about love. And so I guess I would leave it there.
Great, David. I'm gonna stop sharing the screen if that's okay with you.
Yep.
Okay, fantastic. Okay. So if anybody has a question for David or a comment to give, please raise your hand or put it in the chat box. Okay, so I can call upon you. I have to find my chat box again now. Where is it? Oh, yeah. Okay. And Jerry has something to say as the first person. Okay. You can unmute, yes.
I didn't really have anything to say. I was just commenting on the other thing, but
Yeah, just on the comments. Someone wrote, I'll just read what someone wrote. Who's that? Yeah, I'd say sophists, Mark Sparks from earlier, but I mean, may as well. I'd say sophists in any age speak through gaslighting, magic instead of values of beauty, goodness, and truth. Philosophy or love of wisdom doesn't use beauty as sexualizing power in the animal kingdom, but aims up with a true moral compass to the beauty, justice, goodness, righteousness, and truth, intellectual valor by the authority of the kingdom of heaven. Between Eros and Agape rules by the principle of natural law. Okay, fair enough. Shorthand, but here. So yeah, I rambled a lot. So these are ideas still, need to take a final form. But yeah, there's a lot of sacred cows out there, and I mean, Matt's been doing a good job of taking many of these on. RTF overall, Cynthia, and I think so the Renaissance one, and the classical man idea. What's presented as classical today. These are things that I think we really need to clear up, because there's a lot of misinformation, and we're not going to have, you know, if we want to have a golden age, I think real golden age is when we tear down these kind of illusions. Then like the magic happens on its own.
Gerald, you had a comment on Eros.
Yeah, just on that last thing David read of Marx, it's going to sound like a defense of Eros, but there's actually two types of Eros.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea of Eros, just the idea, forget the myths, is the idea of self-love. You love yourself. Now, people say, oh, that's bad. You love yourself. That's being vain, pride. That's being arrogant. But as Nick Jones pointed out to me, there's also a self-love he calls esteem, that you have to have a certain amount of self-esteem, a certain amount of confidence in yourself, which is a totally different kind of Eros than erotic. And I think that was the original concept of Eros. And I kind of like that. And in fact, my wife has a saying on the wall of our bathroom. It's a quote from one of Shakespeare's sonnets where he says, I scorn to change my state with kings. So it's showing that kind of confidence in yourself. I think Lincoln said it best, you know, that right makes might. And that's a kind of self-esteem, Eros, that we should all try for, as opposed to the Neoplatonic concept of Eros, which is the love of yourself, which is arrogance, that we see in Hollywood and we see in Bernini's statues. I mean, they didn't have TV back then, so they had to create their Hollywood stars and their sculptures and that. But I just wanted to point out that there's two kinds of Eros.
I mean, I would even go further. You know, I see like the older I get, you know, you see, I'm going to sound like an old man here, but you know, the young guys, you know, yeah, okay, you want to get the girl and all that. Well, you're gonna have to be responsible. You're gonna have to like do certain things. You're gonna have to be able to, you know, show selflessness. You're going to have to be mindful of certain things and not just think about yourself, asshole, kind of thing, right? So you gotta, even at that level, there is a certain virtue to what is, you know, Schiller talks about this, you know, man is no different than all the other animals, you know, nature, you know, works for him where he can't already sort of trace out the work himself. So man has these automatic instincts, you know, reproduction has got to happen. It's not like something that people have to, you know, reach a unit of life or like the 8th degree of prayer before they're like ready. You know, it's usually doesn't work that way. So all these things have a place. The perversions, the Neoplatonic, the Gnostic, and otherwise, is when they're saying, well, no, it's actually, it's the thing itself, right? Like the Gnostic and these Luciferian sort of ideas. It's like you want to have a mystical experience. You start with the idea that people want to have mystical experiences, and then you tell them how to attain these. Through different kinds of erotic practices or different kinds of altered states, drugs, or meditation. You know, you can imagine like the Woodstock stuff or Esalen style, you know, rebirthing and with images, right? It's got the hypnotic, you have certain narratives that are happening as you do the things and, you know, rituals that you partake in. So that's different. So they're saying you want to have an experience of the divine, you got to do these things. But that just makes me think like the Tao that is spoken is not the true Tao, if you will. Like as soon as you kind of grab onto the thing and be like, I want that thing, you're going to have a mystical or spiritual experience if you actually pursue goodness, truth, and beauty. And you have to you discover the things that you have to do to get closer to that. But you're not chasing an object. Right, you're not after. You're not idolizing something, right? If you're walking the path of truth, all sorts of different things will come your way. So the sleight of hand is there, like, well, you want bored with your everyday office life? You want a mystical experience? Here, come to Legends of Ibiza or something. And, we're going to have like a rave and people are going to dance and they're not ashamed of their bodies. And so once people get into, it's easy to be desensitized, right? Which is why the question of eros is always like, you can understand why for most of history, people have to be careful how these images are presented. Because you can, people may get the wrong ideas, and that can quickly lead to chaos and like societal collapse, as we're seeing today, right? Discernment. For me, I feel this is where it becomes clear. It's only when we can make these kind of nuanced distinctions that, then we can go further.
Paul had a comment in his in the chat. Paul, do you want to voice it yourself, or should I read it?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, this is well, you could read it, but I would still preface it with that it's just some thought that comes to mind. I'm sorry. First of all, excuse me for not listening completely closely. I've been multitasking, so this might be way off in left field. But it does come to mind. Is this the question that I put in there? Maybe you could read it. I don't have it in front of me right now.
I'll read it for you. Any thoughts about claims, fears that technology is corrupting humanity, e.g., our tech has weakened modern man and will completely destroy him in this age of hyper-automatization and AI?
I mean, I think it's like anything else, double-edged sword. I mean, Yuval Harari has a new book called Nexus, and it's all about how... So this is his new Homo Deus. He's got a new one. It's actually interesting to see this guy go. And he's just talking about how this is the new pitch now to say social media has gone too far and it's created too much of echo chambers for people. And it's only sort of, it's just giving feedbacks of what will get the most responses. And it's just becoming like the self-feeding thing. So he's saying that it's, that the problem, like civilization's big problem now is like the circulation of information, and how that there's no censorship of it, such that bad ideas can get, way more traction that would have ever been possible in a normal society. So, I mean, like, okay, so I guess with the whole censorship or social media thing, I think it's like anything else. I mean, if you have a healthy culture, people will use these things in a healthy way. And they have algorithms and it's not helpful. But I mean, there's so many things we can do now, thanks to these things, that like, I wouldn't want to I wouldn't put the genie back in the bottle, right? I would maybe, I would be careful with the phones for developing minds. But I mean, the bad guys are angry that ideas are circulating as much as.
Well,
so I would be careful, technology, Tucker Carlson's, he says he loves nature as well. He hates all the technology, and says, Ted Kaczynski has some pretty good ideas, right? The Unabomber, he had his manifesto, because he says technology is like this like demonic thing that possesses society, and it's sort of taking man away from himself and earth, and it's like a demon. It's a demonic force. And so Tucker drives his diesel truck with like no electronics in it and loves to be in nature. And you have a lot of this. You have like neo-ruralism, right? People are leaving the cities and da-da-da. But, and I guess I'll close on this, and Matt just told me came back from a 4-day camping trip. How happy do you think he was as he told me to like actually have like a real shower and like sit on a real toilet? It was only 4 days, but I think we can all relate to that.
Yeah.
So anytime I hear this like mythos again about like we're just like separated from nature, and you know civilization has just modern civilization has created all these artificial things. I mean, there's a lot of psyops around that. Like, I like civilization. It's nice to live in a city where you actually have things going on. You know, the Shires, I mean, it's nice if you can go for a trip, but it's not like there's much going on, right? So, and for the people who will defend that, I bet you a lot of them still can get on a Zoom and, you know, partake in intellectual discussions and partake in, you know, we do have to get together. So cities are where, you know, ideas can actually, you know, get some ground, right? So yeah, I'm always skittish about people romanticizing, you know, pre-technological ages.
Well, actually, when you talk about that, David, I was thinking about the Duomo in Florence that you showed in your when your announcement was made for the lecture. And I you know, they always say, oh, this is the symbol of the Renaissance. But most people don't understand why is it the symbol of the Renaissance. And you have to know a few things about the area, about the time, before you can make these assertions, right?
Mm-hmm.
And most people are saying, oh yeah, it is a beautiful building. I mean, it's gorgeous. It's a beautiful dome, but they don't really understand why it was the breakthrough building of the Renaissance. And because at that time there was no cranes or anything like that, they had to invent how to build the cupola, and that was not known beforehand. So if somebody doesn't know that, they will just look at the cupola at the church as the Duomo as a beautiful structure, but to understand the technological breakthrough that was made at the time to build this thing, they have no idea about. Okay, so that was just my little side comment. They were also,
and you're not going to have the Duomo built in the Shires.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not really how it works. Like what we want are nice cities. We want cities that that's the whole point of Florence and the way they build their squares. And like,
yeah,
you know, there's some great, watch some great presentations on that, like how you organize a city. There's a reason for certain things. Do you want a closed or open concept? You know, do you want public squares and do you want it to be sort of warm and social, or do you want it to be this cold, technocratic sort of 15-minute hellscape city? But like technology there is, I mean, it's like anything, it's like art. I mean, you want to use art to propagandize people and sort of, or do you want to, that was a long answer, but yeah, that's.
Yeah. But I just thought it was important to understand that if you can't really make a judgment on these things unless you actually understand what was going on at the time. Anyway, Kevin, I think had, I believe it was Kevin, okay, who had a long comment here, and they said he had a question about arts and the painting.
Mm-hmm.
Was that Kevin?
It was me. I just wanted to know the title of the picture with the 7 women and Mercury at the left.
La Primavera
La
by
Primavera de...
Botticelli.
Okay, I'm gonna write it down.
Botticelli.
La Primavera.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's super famous. If you write in Renaissance, it'll probably pop up. But yeah, La Primavera. Spring.
Spring, yeah.
It's really a beautiful painting.
Yeah, well, see, it's nice, the colors and all that, but what does it mean?
Another thing I observed on that painting is that the 3 women on the right, the first one in the pretty beautiful dress, why is the skin has a lizard skin.
I
Go
don't
look
know
at
about
this
that.
picture close up. She got lizard skin. And the other next to her, she's as pure as the other on the left. That's why the kind of banshee is taking her. She's not like the other woman who looks like royalties, reptilian royalty.
Okay, right.
The picture of Renaissance. Looks how
Okay.
looks how
It's
But
a
I also wanted to say, because this whole painting really have not quite a clue about what it's all about. There's different sections in it.
and
Whereas you have, I saw the sculpture that you showed earlier, which was David and Goliath, and that kind of reminded people, obviously, of the story of David and Goliath. And the sculpture obviously was also used for educational purposes to educate people about the story of David and Goliath. So, but I agree with David that this other painting is a little bit obfuscated what it's supposed to be about.
like behind the woman in the middle, you can see the painter made a circle first, not the trees.
It
The
looks like a
circle is
halo.
first. The trees are made from the shadow of the circle. That's also quite special.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But well, thank you for the name of the painting. That's all I wanted.
no
Gerald,
worries, thanks.
Gerald, you had a comment or something to say?
Oh, I had another question for David, because to get back to the idea of the golden age, and when I was younger, you thought the golden age of the Renaissance and people like Da Vinci and Michelangelo were just walking around with these great ideas and having a wonderful time. But the more I read the history of that period, is that they lived at a time in Europe was shortly after the Black Death. The bubonic plague swept through Europe and wiped out almost half the peerages, half the population of Europe. So they were not living in a nice time. So I got this idea that what we call, the Renaissance men, they were not trying to create a golden age. I think they were more concerned about survival. Like, what did we do wrong to get us the Black Death? What do we have to do better? What do we have to improve? What more do we have to learn so that this doesn't happen again? So anyway, I would like your comment on that idea of not a golden age.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I mean, going back to basics, right? At a certain point, isn't that what it's all about? Like Dante, when he was his Commedia, right? It's like a contemporary work, right? And it has him in it, and he's naming contemporary people and how corrupt the church has become and the institutions of the society, and its leadership, and it's just sort of casting a light on it all. He's not pulling his punches, and he's certainly not afraid to call things out. But yeah, and also just going back to basics, and like Petrarch being interested in the classics, right, which weren't really accessible for the longest time, like that. That's crucial. That's another technically going back to basics, going back to the classics. But at the same time, they're not just imitating them, right? The Renaissance took these classical forms, and they cast a lot of Christian ideas, right? They sort of gave them an embodiment in using these classical forms and techniques. So there was progress, right? This idea that the classics is like this static thing, it's super dumb, right? Like the idea that classical art is somehow something in some time, rather than a timeless sort of standard for how to develop, compose, and convey ideas, right, in a beautiful manner. The beauty being the thing that allows them to sort of last, right? That like we continue to want to go back to it, right? The classical works continue to inspire wisdom and virtue and these things. So you're not imitating the classical form itself. You want those things that are going to inspire the real thing, and you're learning the techniques and methods and building on them, like Brunelleschi, Dante, and others. Dante, innovated the epic form, making it like a personal sort of narrative. That was new. Epics are like Homer, right? It's some narrator describing all these scenes in the distance. With Dante, it was very much, here's my journey. Obviously more grandiose than that, but same thing with the architecture, the sculpture. So yeah, they went back to basics. Brunelleschi studied the Parthenon, the Pantheon in Rome, the building, the Duomo, right? But so that you can build something today, like that's relevant to the age in which you live in, right? And that's the mistake I think a lot of this conservative versus like liberal or contemporary, both have a point, but they're only half there. Conservatives want to conserve something that is worth conserving. I mean, we could be more specific. Liberals want progress, right? Things change. Both are true, right? Certain things don't change and certain things change. To the degree we cannot distinguish or discern the changing from the unchanging, yeah, you're not going to have good art. You're not going to have good ideas. You're not going to have discernment. You're not going to have good judgment. Because how are you going to make laws, right? If you're going to make laws to force people to do things a certain way, but you can't, as Schiller points out in the legislation of Lycurgus and so on, you can't compel the best and noblest behaviors. So you can't really make laws for that. You need to create a situation where people will go to these things. So yeah, back to basics we go.
We have two more people who just raised their hand with
Oh, okay.
yes.
I've lost track of time and I'm super my blood sugar is crashing here, but
it's 408. Two more questions and then that's it. Yes, Kelly. Kelly,
Hi.
raised your hand, yeah.
Yeah, we're talking about that painting with the women there. So apparently that was Mercury on the left.
Yeah.
And who is the figure on the right? There was like a dark figure.
I have to pull it up just like that. I forget, but it's relevant plays into the allegory. My computer just died, so
Oh.
I mean, I should probably write up something once I have just very thorough.
Jerry said it's Sapphire. Sapphire. Sapphire.
Zephyr. Yeah, I'm not sure who that
Zephyr's
is.
the guy blowing. Yeah, the analysis seems quite. The Yates, like these people kind of know what they're talking about for this kind of stuff. But there's a lot of that. Like again, but yeah, I forget what the three colored guys are. I saw it before, but I don't want to.
Like I don't know. I'm not. I don't know too much about the whole Renaissance, but like as an innocent bystander, I'm looking at the painting and okay, I know Mercury. He's the messenger, and he's picking an apple from this tree. I'm assuming that apples. Could that be the tree of life from Adam and Eve? Anyways, he's picking this apple. He's got his hand on his hip, and he looks very confident. And he doesn't seem to be aware or interested in these beautiful women that are beside him. And so that gives me the impression somebody's telling me, this messenger guy is saying, pick the apple from the tree of knowledge and stay away from these beautiful women.
I mean, I don't know. That's the thing with these paintings, right? It's easy to read all sorts of things into them. I just wanted to
exactly. It's
just to clarify who's there. Yeah, okay. See, the three graces. So in La Primavera, Botticelli's created a lively scene that includes from left to right the mythological figures Mercury, the three Graces, Venus, right, they're nymphs. The nymph Chloris, Flora, goddess of fecundity, and the west wind Zephyr.
So they're
Above
very
them,
attractive and like any
hang on.
guy in their right mind would just go for them.
Above them, Cupid, the god of erotic love, aims his dart at the three Graces. So again, right, we have this idea of Eros sort of impelling people, the triad, right? Your emanations, sort of transformation and going back. Yeah, there's a whole, that's where you get the magic stuff, right? These are images that people are supposed to keep in their mind as they're thinking about man's divinity, access to the spiritual realm, and So there's this mysticism, right? This is like real sort of like, Emperor Julian style, sun. A lot of it comes to the sun, right? There's a lot of sun worship and this kind of stuff. So yeah, I mean that stuff was that stuff was popular among, some big circles in the Renaissance. Venice was involved in like the Florentine Academy, for what I remembered. Like the head ambassador was there at the opening of the academy and stuff. And yeah, like the more, I think the takeaway here is we have to, we can't take certain narratives for granted. And like, so a lot of these paintings, people talk about things, but if we ask most people what they're about, people don't know.
Yeah.
And then you have these official narratives, and like it turns out like, well, actually, yeah, it's not just like the Renaissance being excited about classical mythology. They'll say that and they'll show you that. They're like, yeah, Renaissance, they're rediscovering the classics. But yeah, there's a lot more going on.
The other thing would be interesting, not just that painting, but when we look at paintings, like this Botticelli, like who did he paint these things for? Like somebody would have
It's for the
either bought them.
Medicis. That was another thing that, like, a lot of the Medicis were using a lot of the art to sort of like as a flex and as propaganda. So it's yeah, art was, weaponized, as it often is.
The Medici people, they would like buy the art and then show it to the public, kind of.
No, you just commission artists to like make stuff for you. That's why the Bernini Teresa.
But then you wouldn't put the art in your private living room. You would want to show your friends, and
yeah, you move it around, right? You put it on display, and then it's in your summer estate or something. And but the Ecstasy of Saint Teresa was also that was directly financed by the Venetian Cornaro family, which was like a very powerful family. So yeah, you can get deeper in who was sponsoring what and for why. You get a whole different level of narratives. So the more superficial. Yeah, Renaissance was great, or like life in ancient Athens was the best. Like not exactly, like it's useful to know what mistakes were made, so that today we can kind of see what mistakes are being made now, especially in this golden age way of thinking.
sure, yeah.
Thank you, David. I have Dave Waugh. I always say it wrong. I know I do. Okay. But this is the very last question, because we have been going on for some time, and David did point out that he needs to have a break. So last question. Dave. Yes.
It's Sue.
Sue, yes.
Thank you for that, David, and wonderful as always. I'm wondering about the ecstasy of Saint Teresa, and you made the connection to Freudian's Eros principle, but it also reminds me of Jung And he brought mysticism into the realm of apparitions and seances and voices from the other realms and levitation, and really the underpinnings of the New Age, and seeing the unconscious as the gateway to divine madness. So I'm wondering if you see a link there. And just in terms of sacred cows, I'm wondering if you have thought about Rumi and Hafiz from the Sufis, the mystical poets. Rumi said, take all the books of wisdom and throw them down the well. I was thinking about something else that, he would wrestle all night, with God, and come out completely disheveled and a madman. And so
Well, for the East, I haven't read enough about, or hadn't read enough Rumi or Hafiz. There does seem to be a lot of good stuff, like quite compelling and edifying stuff from what I've seen. But yeah, I don't I'm not I think there are good mystical traditions in both the East and West. So it's just what is, because there are mysteries, right? Like we'll never fully plumb the mysteries of the soul. Right, like it's always going to be a mystery, but that's actually the exciting part, right? As much as we learn about ourselves, others, as much as we discover about the universe, there will always be that sort of primal mystery. Where do ideas come from? How is man created? What does that even mean, right? How is the universe created and developing? These things only should become become clearer and more abundantly sort of they floor us. And that's the beauty of it all. So the counterpoint is, I think the evil is the stuff that mystifies that and sort of introduces these sleights of hand to say, oh yes, these are good things. Here's how you get there. And then they're going to propose certain things. And so, yeah, Jung, Matt's done a lot of work on this, and it's really just Satanism, right? It's we think of plastic devil horn stuff, but I think that, again, that's another thing I like to attack. It's not plastic devil horn stuff. The Satanism is, there's these real Gnostic, so it's magic. Jung was very big on, he wanted to revive magic. His big grievance is that modern man lost the magic of archaic man. Where Jung gives so many examples. He's talking about meeting Aboriginals, Native Americans, and the guy prays for 8 hours a day to make sure that the sun crosses the sky. And when Jung's talking to him, the guy says, of course we have to do this, the white man doesn't understand, if we didn't do that, he doesn't know does he really know what would happen, because the sun would fall out of the sky or something. So for Jung, this was enchantment, right? This was the idea that meaning making. So they will tell you that it's all just meaning making. And yeah, there's different myths and they symbolize different things, but one system isn't better than the other. It's really just a question of whether people lose meaning or not. And here are, different ways to access that. The unity, the Platonic one, right, that we all want to go back to, that's also, Jung talks about this kind of stuff as well, individuation and accessing the psyche, which is this collective thing that's going to guide us. And it just gets weirder and weirder, once you get past the exoteric pop culture, self-actualization sort of motivational stuff, you get really weird Gnostic stuff that is exactly what was at the heart of trying to infiltrate and destroy Christianity. So, and it wears the guise of it has a pseudo-Christian sort of veneer. That's not by accident. They know what they're doing. They're magicians is probably the right word. That's how they see themselves. And that's why you use images, right? Why was Jung so big on myth, right? Because when you get people thinking in terms of mythological images, you're bypassing their certain conscious parts of their being, and you're getting them to emote with images. And so you can repattern people. And so you'll meet a lot of people who are very much into the Jung stuff. They can't really think about history in any kind of like strategic or like real world political sense, because they don't really know anything about like how intelligence agencies work, how like economic systems work. They're just viewing everything through the prism of myth, which it may sound good, but oftentimes it's it really just screws them up. And because they think, you know, Jung is so big on the projection thing. So whatever evil you see in the world, it's just something that you're projecting that you haven't resolved within yourself. So it's like, okay, so there's no intelligence agencies trying to like kill people, and like, you know, Jung was like literally advising the head of the CIA, Dulles and stuff. He was like mentor or something, spiritual guide, probably magician, whisperer. That's how this stuff works, right? You have a priesthood class like this Yeats, these scholars, these, you know, so obviously psychology, that's the Neoplatonic magic, which Jung talks about. Neoplatonism was one of his access points to trying to resolve the problems of modern man. So you see that a lot. Like all the Luciferians and Satanists, like that's one of their big sort of watchwords, you know, the crisis of modern man, and we need to go back to those magical times and slay the dragons and, you know, get back in touch with Luna and our psyche, which has been suppressed by like ugly buildings. And, you know, you could go on.
Right. So the way he works with archetypes, it really triggers the mythical imagination then. And he's re-invoking all of these Gnostic, pre-Christian.
Big time. Black sun, moon, all sorts. Like, I have friends, I mean, and the things I hear, I'm like, what are you just talking about the black sun and stuff? I'm like, what? Why are we? Yeah, and that's like needed for ascension and like
Right.
individuation. You know.
All right.
Thank you.
So David, Menaka thinks that you should give a presentation on Jung.
Yeah, I mean, I'll definitely just have to bring it all together. But yeah, it's in the works. I have I've been focusing more on the arts and our literary journal, which the new issue is about to come out very shortly. I have a 14,000 word dialogue that's going to be featured in it. We have a lot of original works. So all my time has gone into that. And once that's all over, once that's out and people can get it, Age of Muses or the Chain Muse, if you're subscribed to either, you'll know when it's out. Then I have like 2-3 long deep dives that are all like half done for Matt. So yeah, a lot of bombshells are coming. So thanks for listening to me ramble for like 2 hours.
Thank you so very, very much. I think you provoked you did some provocations here. So thank you so very much, David, and we're looking forward to having you again. And
See you guys soon.
Yeah. And with that, we are closing off Sunday afternoons, Rising Tide Foundation. I wish you all a good week, and we'll see you next Sunday.
Thanks, Steve.
Goodbye,
bientôt.
everyone. See you next
Bye.
week.
Ciao.
Adios.
Ciao.